Sometimes it's good to look back at what you have done. And since one of the Matera Project pieces was sold and it's going to a collector in Tokyo, Japan, I thought it was a good idea to revisit these works. This is a compilation of the 7 videos of the Matera Project without the intros and the swatches, so you can focus only on the art. But if you prefer to watch the full series video by video, there's a link in the description for the playlist. During my stay in the historical Sassi di Matera, I became captivated by the tangled architecture of its stone buildings and caves, where it's almost impossible to tell where one house ends and another one begins. It feels like one giant, complex, interconnected structure carved from stone. I took hundreds of photos during my visit, many of which reminded me of the also intricate and imaginative work of M.C. Escher. For the first study, I selected a view of the old city encircled by the main road, with the cathedral tower rising at the top. I wanted to sketch quickly just to get a sense of how the city is structured. It was very hard to distinguish one building from another, since they are all interconnected, and sometimes the roof of one house even serves as the terrace of another. I started with a loose graphite sketch and added a bit of watercolor. This sketchbook is not made for watercolor, but handles water very well. I painted some of the houses in slightly warmer yellows and others in soft pinks or brownish grays. In the end, I decided to go over a few buildings with a black fine liner to make them stand out. I really enjoyed doing this first sketch, and I was ready to move on to another view of the city. For the second sketch, I wanted more definition and detail. I started with a lighter Rembrandt oil pencil in sepia light, then went over it with Watercolor Nero black pencils. The lighter pencils are essentially oil pastels encased in wood, and I love working with them. They are smooth to use and the colors are beautiful. Watercolor Nero pencils are a blend of oil and carbon. This composition gives them a rich deep black, similar to charcoal, but with less dust and smudging thanks to the oil content. They are as dark as charcoal, but offer the control of a pencil, making them perfect for detailed work without the mess. In this sketch, I used all 5 Nero pencils, from the extra hard for more line control to the extra soft for darker tones. For the sky, I used the Lyra Rembrandt oil pencil in Sanguine. These first two sketches are just the beginning of the Matera project. There is so much more to explore in this ancient city carved from stone. I'm excited to keep translating its atmosphere into drawings and paintings and sharing each step of the process here on my channel. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to follow along. Subscribe for weekly updates on the project's progress and more. I wanted to create a detailed artwork with ink on paper, so I selected the smoothest options I had in my studio. Of course, you can work with any paper you like, but if you don't want the texture interfering with the ink flow, you should go for Bristol paper or something similar. Bristol is a high-quality paper known for its smooth surface, commonly used when we want clean, precise finish. I selected 3, but I was really choosing between 2, Lana Bristol and 100 Nostalgie, the same paper I use in the sketchbook you often see in my videos. I love Lana Bristol, but for the Matera project, I thought the subtle color of the Nostalgie paper would be a better fit. This warm, light yellow, what they call natural white, matches the stone walls of Matera beautifully. I also looked through my spare papers folder to see if I had any other options. I have a great collection. In the end, I decided to go with Nostalgie. For the size, I choose A4, not too big, but big enough for the details I wanted. I printed some of my photos to use them as reference during the project. This view is the one I'll be using today. Before sketching, I drew the margins using these template rulers with preset sizes. I just pick the one I want and avoid having to measure the paper. I used a Caldas graph wood pencil in HB. I made the first sketch while observing the photo without worrying too much about perspective. Matera is so intricate with buildings facing every direction that a few inaccuracies wouldn't really compromise the feel. Even without a ruler, I had a perspective point I kept in mind, guiding my hand and imagining lines radiating from it. While sketching, sometimes I'll change the position of something to improve the image composition. In this case, I moved the cathedral tower a bit to the side so we can see it better with more space around it. The drawing was so detailed that the printed photo I had wasn't enough. I couldn't see all the elements clearly. So I kept going back to the digital photo on my computer since my phone was being used as camera for filming. This made the sketching phase a bit slower than expected because I had to keep looking back at the screen to zoom in on parts of the photo. I'm even considering getting a tablet just for reference photos now that I'm making these videos and my phone is occupied with filming. I love this part, drawing with ink. And I'm still making decisions as I go. I'm not just following the sketch. I use different nib sizes, but mostly 0.05 and 0.03. I also used the node 0.03 that's a bit dry. If I apply very little pressure, almost no ink comes out, creating a line even thinner than a new 0.03 pen. I love the line drawing just as it is. For me, the piece could have been finished just with those, but I knew I wanted to shade it. For the stones and plants in the landscape, I drew different textures to represent different plant species. At one point you have to ask yourself, how much texture and contrast is enough? Even though I like how it looks, to me, it's not finished yet. I want to keep working on it, adding more contrast and volume. Finishing a piece is sometimes very intuitive. For me, it's when I feel like I don't need to add anything else, when I know that if I do, I might ruin it, which has definitely happened before. And this is one of the key differences between working with traditional materials and working digitally. In digital, you can create multiple versions at any time. With traditional media, some decisions can't be undone, and I think that's actually good for us as artists. It helps us understand what it is we really want to communicate instead of exploring every possible option. Now back to the Fineliners. For the mountains far in the back, I used Pointillism to shade them. Pointillism is really time-consuming. It's definitely not the fastest way to add tonal value to a drawing, but I enjoy doing it and I also love the final result. I use an intuitive approach to how I distribute the dots that might seem random to you, but I'm following a pattern in my mind and I'm always assessing where I should add more dots. Some of the plants and rocks needed to be darker, each with its own texture. In the sky, I wanted a very subtle gradient, so I knew I had to layer it slowly, making sure all the colors were blended well. Polychromos pencils are perfect for that, they blend well, but you still have to be patient and not press too hard against the paper. If you're patient enough, you progressively see a beautiful gradient appearing on your work. For this painting, I want to have a high horizontal line, so there will be more of the plants and rocks of the hill on the image than the sky. As for the format, I'll go with square this time, and I'll move the cacti or cactuses in the foreground a little bit to the left for a better composition. You don't have to draw perfect lines as margins for a sketchbook study, but since my early years in graphic design college, I've been trying to keep my studies tidy thanks to my dear professors. I'm dabbing the kneaded eraser to remove only part of the graphite. I want to keep the lines visible. Usually I start my sketches by marking the proportions and distances between elements I see in the reference onto the paper. Sometimes you have to stop and look more closely before continuing, because understanding the image and the relationships between forms and shapes is essential for observational drawing. This is even more important when drawing from life, which is not the case here. In the photo, the church is almost sideways from our point of view, and it's so far away that we don't need much perspective in this drawing. In the final piece, I'll be more accurate, but right now it isn't necessary. If I were just following the photo, the cacti in the foreground would be almost completely cropped from the drawing. So I moved them to the left because I want to include them in the final painting. Now, I'm marking color areas for the watercolor study in the next phase. I have watercolor sets from different brands and I love them all. This one is from the Van Gogh line by Royal Talents. This one is White Night by Nieskaya Palitra. And this one is a Rembrandt set also by Royal Talents. Now, let me organize the table before I start painting. The sky in this painting isn't the focal point and it's going to be very subtle and not too vibrant. This paper isn't made for watercolor, but as I said in a previous video, it works well for studies. This is a Honey Nostalgie sketchbook. Now I'm preparing 3 different greens on the same palette. On the middle I put sap green, that I want to be the base color. On one side I mix with a little bit of ultramarine blue, and on the other side with a little bit of yellow ochre and gunboat. Then I start painting with the lighter color first. With a dry brush, I'm removing the excess water that I didn't want it in this part of the painting. I like painting small swatches on the side of the study to keep the information of the colors and watercolor brands I've used in it. I wanted to add more texture to the plants, especially the cacti on the foreground, and more contrast in general. I also darkened some parts of the church. Painting this landscape on watercolor paper is going to be a pleasure, but it also has its challenges. I want to use 100% cotton paper and keep the background wet while I paint, so I can get a soft and diffuse effect. Will I be able to do justice to this beautiful place? For this piece, I wanted to use 100mm expression paper. It's a 100% cotton paper, really good. It has a fine texture. And I'm going to draw the margins with those preset rulers that I really love, because I wanted a margin that was a little bit wider than my gray tape, but not so wide as my white tape. So I decided to draw first and then mask it with the tape later to get a perfect margin this time. You don't have to do this, you can just go straight to tape. And now I'm getting my two reference photos. I have one with more background, another one with the church a little bit closer. And then I decided to use my white tape to mask the margins. It's a little bit wider than the margin that I draw, so I will have to fold it, but it's okay. And because I decided to draw the margin first and then tape it, I had to be sure that my tape would match the graphite line on the paper. So that's why I'm super careful with the tape. These masking tapes by 100mm are very good. I have 4 of them, different sizes, and they were created to be used on watercolor paper. So as you can see, you can safely remove them. But it's still, when I'm removing them after the painting is done, I'm a little bit more careful because, you know, better safe than sorry. And I don't want to tear my paper. And now, before starting this sketching, I will pay attention to the reference, and at first I will look where I think the horizontal line is and where I would like it to be on my paper. So usually I start with the horizontal line, and then from there I start measuring approximately the elements, the distances between elements and the proportions, and marking it on paper. So this is the first step. If I don't like the size of an element and if I don't think the proportions are right, I will just erase them and start again. And I can do this as many times as necessary, because it's perfectly normal not to get it right in the first time. One thing that I might do during the sketching phase is to maybe change a little bit what I'm seeing in the reference to match my vision. So, for example, I can make something larger, bigger, or smaller, or maybe if I'm not trying to be perfectly loyal to the reference, I can just move something a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, because the final painting will be my interpretation of this landscape. It's not necessarily the reality of it. Still, in the parts of the image that I want to be as close as possible to the reference photo, I will pay more attention to the proportions and distances. So this part will take more time in this case, because I'm trying to get the church as close as possible to the real church. In this footage from the side, you can see the subtle texture of the paper. This Honey expression paper has those lines, very soft, very beautiful, and I really enjoy it in the final result. And I think they kind of helped me to draw, because I was drawing so many parallel lines to the horizon that I think they acted like guidelines in a way. These arcs are not part of the church, but they are at the same plane and they are very beautiful, so I decided to include them with a little bit more detail than the background. But as you can see in the photo, there were other elements on the street this day. They were having like, I think it was a movie festival or something. But those elements I decided not to add to my painting. They were not part of the city. They were just there for like a weekend or something. You probably will notice that I use the kneaded eraser quite often in my drawings. It might feel like it doesn't make sense, but what I'm trying to do is to remove the excess graphite, but without erasing completely the drawing, because I want to be able to see the lines of the first sketch so I can draw on top of that. I spent quite some time drawing the church because I wanted it to be the main object, the main focus of the painting, and I wanted to be detailed and to contrast with the loose background. So I wanted it to be very precise, while the background would be very loose and blurry and diffuse. Except for the foreground will be a little more detailed, but not as much as the church. So that's why I'm trying to be as precise as I can, but without a ruler, just measuring with my eyes and my feelings. One thing that I really enjoy about drawing and painting a scene, for example, or even an object or the face of a person, a portrait, is that when you do an activity like that, you get to really notice all the features of this place or this face, because in order to be able to draw, you have to be able to see the difference between sizes and distances, colors. So to draw something is an exercise of being present and paying attention to what you're watching. If it's in real life, even better. But sometimes even in photo, when you draw from a photo, you get to know this place better than if you just see the photo and then move on. So because I'm drawing this church, this St. Peter's Church, I might be able to talk about details on the architecture of this church that maybe someone who lives in Matera won't be able to tell. So this is something really special, and that's why I encourage everyone to draw and paint. It doesn't have to be perfect. The important thing is not the result, is the act of paying attention and noticing the world around you. Now I'm just marking the main features of this part of the landscape. Then I will kind of draw at the same time as I paint. I will draw with the brush, because that part was the part that I said that I was going to be more diffuse. So I don't really need too much detail. And right now I'm just drawing a little bit of the cacti, because this part, it's on the forefront, will have more detail. Now that the drawing is ready, I'm going to organize everything, put away the drawing material, and put the watercolor material on the desk so I can start painting. When I'm starting a painting session, usually I prefer to use a dropper to wet my watercolors. But then while I'm painting, in the middle of the painting, I would rather use a spray bottle. Then I decided to paint an extra page of watercolor swatches with the mixtures I was thinking about using during the painting. I started wetting the paper with a large and soft brush, paying extra attention to the church limits, because I just wanted to have the mountains and the sky wet. The church will be painted only on the second layer. And then I always start from top to bottom and from left to right. So I started with the sky. I wanted a very subtle sky, not too bright, not too many colors, just a simple blue. And I wanted to have this part very subtle. I would like it to feel that like there's a little bit of clouds, but not a lot of definition. And right now I'm doing this as a way to help gravity, because I wanted the blue to slide to a little bit closer to the bottom. And then I moved to painting the mountains. So I decided to use a little bit of purple, some parts more purple, sometimes more warm, sometimes more cold, because I also didn't want too much detail in the background. Right now I'm being extra careful not to paint the church in purple, because watercolor is very transparent. So if there is a little bit of purple in the church, it will be able to be seen when I finally paint the church. So I wanted to avoid it. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes a little bit of ink moves to a part that you don't want, but I usually try my best not to. And here I'm adding different colors because I didn't want this part to be just one color. So as you can see, there's purple, but there's a little bit of blue, a little bit of green. And I also wanted to have this middle part very clear, more water than pigment, because I wanted to feel like mist, you know. For me, this painting is morning, and also the photo was taken during the morning light. And I wanted to keep this feeling of waking up. And this part of the painting is really a pleasure when you get to play around with pigments and water, and you can watch the watercolor and the colors mixed and slide from one side to the other. It's really a pleasure. Even if you're doing abstract work, I strongly recommend playing with more water, less water, more pigment. For me, this is part of the joy of watercolor. And now we are entering a phase in the watercolor process where you start adding splashes of colors in different places, and at first it doesn't really make any sense. You feel like you're ruining it, and you're going to have to throw the watercolor painting away. But then you just trust the process, continues painting, and then it all makes sense in the end. What I'm doing is I added a lighter green where I want to have more light. So these are part of the plants that are receiving sunlight. And then I'm slowly moving to darker greens. And now I'm preparing the base color for the rock. In my reference photo, the rock is more grayish, more cold grayish, but I wanted more warm. I was going for more warm in general. The church will also be more warm. And then I'm back to the greens, slowly building the layers of the plants and the layers of the rock. And now I'm adding purple to a shadow part of the rock. So right now it doesn't make sense, but in the end I promise it will. So this is the part with less light in my reference photo, and I want to be more kind of cold instead of warm. So that's why the bluish purple. In this part there were some plants in the shadows, so that's why I wanted it to be darker. And I'm also adding a little bit of texture to the plants. I'm doing this movement with the brush as if I was stamping the brush, because I wanted to have some parts with more water, other parts with more pigments, other parts completely dry. So this is a way to add texture to a part of the painting. And now I'm adding also some dark parts, because we are moving from the lighter color to the darker color to create the volume. In my reference photo, the church is kind of grayish yellow, but in my painting I wanted to add a little bit of color to the church and this wall in front of the church. So I started with yellow, but then I progressively added a little bit of pink in the mixture. So I kept some parts of the church yellow, the parts that were receiving more light, because the sun was hitting the floor in front of the church and reflecting back to the facade. So the facade I kept in yellow, also this wall on the side with the arches. But the side of the church, I added more color, and eventually I arrived in brownish, kind of warm brown. In the reference photo, the side of the church was in the shadows. It was not receiving direct sunlight. And I kept it this way, but I added more color. In my photo, it was more grayish. I wanted to add more definition to the background. There were two facades that I wanted to be more visible. So I started to add this color that I didn't really like. So I kept trying to fix it. As you can see right now, I was adding a little bit of purple and blue. Still, this is the part of the painting that I would paint differently if I could go back in time. As you might have noticed already, watercolor, when dried, gets a little bit lighter. So it wasn't the end of the world. I think I was able to fix it a little bit. And I was also happy to be able to give a little more definition to those facades that I wanted in the background. And I also liked that I was able to recover a little bit of that blue purple that I liked. This was the end of the first painting session, and next I will paint the details of the church. For the detailed part of the painting, I'm using my smaller brushes, but more important than the size is the shape of the brush. So as you can see, this one has this fine tip, and this is super important. So maybe you don't have a smaller brush, but if you have a medium brush or even a bigger brush with fine tip, it will work for details. And this one is one of my favorites. It's by Skoda, and I do have smaller brushes than this one, but I think this one is one of my favorites for details. One important thing to keep in mind when doing detailed work is not to press too hard the brush against the paper. Otherwise, you will not take advantage of the fine tip. So you will only be able to draw a very fine line with a fine tip if you press lightly. So this is also more important than the brush itself. It's the way you draw the brush stroke. So I recommend, if you'd like to do detailed work, practice a little bit before moving on to the final piece. Here I'm trying to add a little bit of texture to the church walls. Those walls are made of stones, so some parts are darker, some parts are lighter. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm also adding darker colors to the shadows so we can see the volume of the church better. This church is very old. It's considered to be from the 13th century, but they say it's probably older than that. And it's been through a lot of changes, a lot of renovations. And you can see by this view from the side that the church has different styles, completely different materials. So this tower, right, that I'm painting right now, it looks very, very old, but that part on the top looks like it's more modern. So just by looking to the side of this church, you can already see that it's been through a lot of changes over time, and it's now a mixture of styles. One thing that I like about this building is that it blends well with the hill that it's located, because it's the same stone, the same colors, so it looks like just one thing. And now I'm starting a new painting session. The church part is already done and dry, and I'm going to paint the foreground, the cacti, also some plants, and I'm gonna add more details to the rocks. I started adding a little bit of texture to this part. This is cacti, but also other plants. It's a mixture. And I'm adding different greens, lighter greens and darker greens. This plant was really different. It's one of a kind. That's why it has this special design in my painting. It's the only one that I could see in the photo. And this is kind of not so close and not so far. And this is the foreground. So this is the part that I wanted to add more detail and be a little more careful with volume and texture. So I'm starting with the first layer, and then later I will go back and add more details. I'm adding darker values to create shadows and also to create some cactus behind the cactus, so we could like have a sense of dimension. And then I decided to finally finish this part right in the middle of the paper that was empty, and it needed some plants. Here I'm using different types of textures to indicate different types of plants, adding a little bit of detail to the plants that are closer to where I'm standing, but also a little bit of detail to the plants closer to the church. I'm also adding some texture to the rocks. I'm using the same warm brown that I used before, just a little bit darker, because I decided in this painting that I wanted everything to be a little warmer than the reference photo. So in the reference photo you would see like almost gray, but here I'm painting everything kind of brown. Now I'm darkening some parts of the cacti, also adding more darker parts, because I wanted to have more value in the cacti as a whole. And when working with watercolor, usually you start from light to dark. So if you want to have something dark in the back, you will have to paint it later. So this is the process. And now I'm adding a little bit of texture and a little bit of flowers in some of the cactuses. The painting is almost ready, so now it's just remove the tape and final touches. Right now I'm just waiting for it to be really dry so I can remove the tape. Then I'll sign, and then tomorrow morning, with fresh eyes and morning sun, maybe I'll see something else that I might want to change, like a little touch-up. I was a little bit worried this time removing the tape, because I felt like it was a little more glued to the paper than usual. So that's why I'm being extra careful. And still, even though I'm extra careful, I feel that some part of the paper were a little bit damaged, but not too much. there wasn't a rip or anything like this. There wasn't a tear, but it's still not really perfect. And I'm using this tool because I feel like the fibers were a little bit disturbed and I want to put them back in place, kind of. This block is glued on all 4 sides, so it's really perfect to paint directly on it and then remove the paper just when you're finished. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. And then, as I expected, some final touches, but not too many. And now the painting is ready. Before I start painting or drawing, I plug in the microphone and turn on the cameras so I can record the process to later create these videos. For this piece, I wanted to use a vertical reference photo with a crop of the city, very abstract kind of, very graphic, with not a lot of perspective, more like a texture of the city, something like that. And for that, I decided to use toned paper in beige, this one by Canson Graduate, because I think it would be helpful to have a base color already. To draw the margins, I'm using colored graphite in red. And I'm sketching with yellow pencil very lightly because I will go over the first sketch with a darker pencil later. But I wanted to have some lines beforehand and I don't want to erase them completely. So that's why I went for a color very similar to the base color. Here I'm observing the reference photo and drawing the buildings and houses as I saw in the photo, but not too worried about perspective. As I said before, I'm going for a more flat approach to perspective, more kind of abstract in a way. And especially in the upper part of the drawing, it has very little perspective, so I'm not worried about vanishing point and things like that. But I am trying to follow the proportions of the drawings and having the main elements on the paper. Some details I'm just leaving behind and I'm selecting those as I draw. This part at the bottom of the paper that we are seeing from the top, our point of view is higher than this part. This part has a little bit of perspective, but I'm not super worried about that. I'm drawing it very loosely. And now that I'm finishing the first sketch, let me introduce you to my cat, Yuki. We are in winter time here in Brazil, and this is his favorite spot in the studio right now because of the heater, as you can imagine. And he is my studio assistant. Back to the painting. Now I'm going over the first sketch with a darker pencil and stronger lines. I'm also adding more details and correcting some parts that I draw too loosely in the first sketch, so it will be closer to what I want in the final piece. I think in this piece will be good to have some parts with less details and some parts with more details, like these stairs that I'm drawing right now. So I have a tendency to add too much detail. So let's see if I'll be able to keep it simple this time. I don't know. The roof also, I decided to add more details, but maybe I will leave some facades, the wall itself, with less detail. Let's see. But I added a little bit of color to some of the walls, so they will have a slightly different shades of color, not too much. And then I decided that the stairs would be drawn with more details. I think this will work. And I'm using different colors for the line work. I don't know if I'll go over it with different colors, but right now I'm enjoying as it is. So the top part of the drawing is a warm brown, kind of reddish, and the bottom is kind of yellowish brown, something like that. After finishing the line work, I'll add color to the facades as well. Now I'm doing two things at the same time. I'm sharpening the pencil, but at the same time I'm keeping the soft pastel powder to be used with a cotton ball on the walls. I lift a little bit of the powder with the cotton ball and I apply it directly to the paper. So I will still have the beige color of the paper, but in some parts it could be a little more yellow, others a little more pinkish. Different buildings with different colors. And I'm also going over the lines with the cotton ball, pressing the cotton ball against the paper as a way to make the lines softer, but at the same time to make the pigment adhere better to the paper. The result is a kind of stained paper with some parts with more color, some parts with less color. The lines are very soft and diffuse, very blurry, and I think by itself it's already beautiful. It could be more with more contrast, but I like it already. But in my case, this is the base for the next phase. And now I'm changing the setup of my lights and my cameras and organizing the studio for the next phase because I wanted to work in a vertical position. So that's why I needed an easel with more inclination than my current table allows to. I decided to use tape to protect the margins. At first I wasn't going to, but then I changed my mind. And I'm doing this repeated motion of applying it to the easel and removing it so I can have less glue on the tape so it will preserve better the paper itself. I really enjoyed the line work. I thought it was very loose and I enjoyed that. But my initial idea was to add some color to the buildings as a way to differentiate them, and also to add darker colors to create shadows and volume. Now I'm adding this piece of paper, it's a regular printer paper, just to protect the piece so my hand and my arm won't ruin everything. And it was also part of my initial plan to add some texture to the walls, to the buildings. But while I was doing this part, I was already questioning myself if maybe there was too much texture on this part. I was first testing in this small part in the top left, and then I stopped working on this project for a few days, and when I got back, I decided to erase part of the texture with a cotton ball, as you can see me doing right now. I decided to maybe have some texture, but not so busy, more like a simple texture. So I started adding more colors, different colors for different buildings, but blending it with cotton. I've also created some gradients with two colors, sometimes more, and some mixtures of colors, blending it with cotton and sometimes also using a blending stump. The blending stump is better if you want to preserve the color. If you press the blending stump against the paper, it will help the pigment to adhere better to the paper, so the color will be more vibrant and darker and richer. And the cotton might erase a little bit, so depending on what you want, you might want to choose one or the other. For this work, I selected analogous colors, colors that are close together in the color wheel. All of them warm tones, only cool tones on shadows and some of the windows. So that's why you have this harmony between all the buildings' facades, and you have this contrast between the facades and the windows. In this roof, I decided that I wanted a color that was not ready in my pencil box, so I had to mix 3 or 4 colors to get the exact color I wanted. So this is something that you can do with pencils, soft pastels, but also colored pencils. You can layer the colors and then blend them with cotton balls or blending stumps or any other blending materials. Sometimes you can also work with makeup brushes, they are great for that. Those 2 buildings in the middle of the cityscape were very important for the composition, so I wanted to have more texture in this part. I also wanted to use different colors, so maybe next to the roof it would be more gray, next to the bottle more pink or pinkish. And there was also a big part of this building, almost the first floor, was really gray, I think because of the weather, so the stone was a little bit darker. So right now I'm focusing on this part with grayish stones. This part has a little more texture than all other parts of the painting, and I like the result. This is it's not a regular gray, it's a kind of yellowish gray, and I think it worked well with the painting. I also use it in other parts of the painting, so it wouldn't be only there. It would be weird if it was only in one place. So I think it worked well. In this part, for example, I'm using the same gray for shadows, but later I will add a cooler gray. And now, as I was approaching the bottom part of the painting, I was kind of missing the line work. As you can see now, I'm actually adding some lines so I can see where the shadows go. So in this part, I was considering if I should add more contrast to some parts of the building so I would have more contrast and more volume, or if I should keep the flatness of the drawing with the lines. So I was torn between those two options. The bottom part of the painting is the only part that really needs perspective to be understood. So I was already working on a very flat painting, but I thought that maybe the lines would work better. And then it looks like I forgot where I had placed my main camera, and I have a lot of minutes just filming my hair and my shoulder. But that's okay, this was the ending of this layer. As you can see, I decided to add the lines back, and I'm also adding more color to some parts. So that's what I will be basically doing in this layer. Adding lines, the line work will go back, adding colors, and also finally painting the doors and the windows. Sometimes I think that staying away a few days from the work will make you go back with more clarity. But I think in this case was quite the opposite. I think I came back with more doubts about what I wanted for this piece. And as I continued, I was alternating how I felt about the work. In some parts, I even considered maybe adding a fourth layer after I finished this one. But to be honest, when I got to the bottom part, I was kind of tired of working in this piece. In a previous video, we were talking about how do we know when a piece is finished, and I was telling you that I think that a piece is finished when I think that I don't have anything else to add, and if I continue, I might ruin the work. But this is the second case, when I think that I'm tired and I want to move on to the next piece, so I will just finish and consider it done. I was very happy doing this part of the painting, doing this shadow inside of the arch, because I think I love gradients and working with gradients. But the bottom part with all those different perspectives, different elements, I think this was the part that really was getting me tired. So after finishing this bottom part, adding back the line work but also some textures and shadows, I decided that the work was done. In the end, after one night of sleep, I think I quite like the result. There are some parts that I'd like to have done differently, but that's okay. So here is the final result, and I think it's also the last piece of the Matera project because I've already have something else in mind. I really enjoyed working with my photos from this amazing city, Matera, and also the photos from the Snippets from Europe project, the project before this one. But I think now I'm ready to finally answer the call to draw and paint scenes from the place I live. We've been living close to this preservation park for almost 5 years now, and I'm ready to dedicate myself to it. now I'm organizing my ideas and my thoughts and preparing for this next phase that I'm really excited about. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to follow along and watch more of my process and my everyday life here in the studio, subscribe to the channel and follow me in my next project. Bye!